In this activity, you'll explore the diversity of fleshy fruits. Fleshy fruits are those in which at least part of the pericarp, or fruit wall, becomes soft and edible. As you examine different fruits, you'll see how fruits vary in their structure and in the tissues that contribute to their development. You'll also observe how fruit structures help protect seeds and promote dispersal, often by attracting animals that eat the fruit and transport the seeds to new locations. Fleshy fruits can be classified into several categories based on how they develop. Drupes, sometimes called stone fruits, have a fleshy middle layer called the mesocarp and a hard endocarp that surrounds the seed. Berries have a fully fleshy pericarp and typically contain multiple seeds. Pomes, such as apples, are accessory fruits, meaning that much of the edible portion develops from this receptacle rather than the ovary alone. Aggregate fruits develop from multiple ovaries within a single flower. Multiple fruits develop when the ovaries of many flowers fuse together into a single structure. Before we begin the observations, consider this question. Why might plants evolve different types of fleshy fruits, such as drupes, berries, pomes, aggregate fruits, and multiple fruits, instead of relying on just one fruit type? Think about the different ways animals interact with fruits and how fruit structure might influence seed dispersal. As you examine the fruits in this activity, consider how their structures might help move seeds to new environments. Before we examine the fruit, let's talk about the structure of a drupe, sometimes called a stone fruit. Drupes develop from a single ovary, and the fruit wall differentiates into 3 layers. The outer skin forms the exocarp. Beneath that is the mesocarp, which becomes the fleshy portion that we typically eat. The innermost layer of the fruit wall becomes the endocarp, which hardens into the familiar pit or stone that surrounds the seed. This hard endocarp protects the seed as the fruit is eaten and transported by animals. Common examples of drupes include cherries, peaches, plums, mangoes, and olives. One of the easiest ways to identify a drupe is the presence of a single seed enclosed in a hard pit, surrounded by fleshy fruit tissue. When you cut the fruit in this activity, pay attention to how clearly you can see the 3 layers of the pericarp and the seed enclosed within the endocarp. First, examine a drupe, such as this plum. After making a longitudinal cut through the fruit, identify the exocarp, which is the outer skin. The mesocarp forms the fleshy portion of the fruit. Inside this layer is the endocarp, which forms the hard pit that surrounds the seed. In your notebook, draw the cut section and label the exocarp, mesocarp, endocarp, and seed. In addition to the berries we're observing in the lab, botanists recognize several specialized types of berries based on how the fruit develops from the flower. A true berry develops from a superior ovary and typically forms from 1 or more fused carpels. In these fruits, the entire pericarp becomes fleshy as the fruit matures. Examples of true berries include grapes, tomatoes, eggplants, and avocados. The Hesperidium is a specialized type of berry found in citrus fruits. These fruits have a thick, leathery rind that contains oil glands, which is why citrus peels release such a strong aroma when squeezed. Inside, the fruit is divided into segments filled with juice sacs. Familiar examples include oranges, lemons, and grapefruits. The Epigynous berry forms from an inferior ovary, meaning that other floral parts surround the ovary and become incorporated into the fruit. Because additional floral tissues contribute to the fruit structure, these are considered accessory fruits. Examples include bananas, blueberries, and cranberries. Another specialized berry type is the pepo, which develops in plants of the gourd family. Pepos have a thick rind and also develop from an inferior ovary. Common examples include pumpkins, cucumbers, and watermelons. Together, these examples show that even within a single fruit category like berries, there is a great deal of structural diversity that reflects differences in flower anatomy and fruit development. Next, examine a grape. This is a classic example of a berry. After slicing the grape, look for the exocarp, the thin outer skin. Inside the fruit, the mesocarp and endocarp are both fleshy. The endocarp is the whitish area. Count the seeds. This grape is seedless, meaning the seeds did not fully develop. Draw and label the layers of the fruit in your notebook. Now examine the tomato, which is also classified as a berry. Before you look at the tomato cut open, look at how the tomato grows on the bush. Sometimes you will get tomatoes with the calyx still on there. Does this make it a superior or inferior ovary? It's a superior ovary. On this grape tomato, I've attached what the calyx end looks like. On the opposite end, you can see the remnant of the stigma and style. After slicing the tomato crosswise, observe the internal chambers called locules, which contain the seeds. The placenta connect the seeds to the fruit. The tissue separating the locules is the columella in the center, and the arms are the internal or radial pericarp. I've added those terms because students often ask me in lab about it. Draw and label the exocarp, mesocarp, endocarp, locules, and seeds. Next, we'll look at pomes, which include fruits like apples, pears, and quinces. Pomes are considered accessory fruits. This means that the fleshy portion of the fruit does not come entirely from the ovary. Instead, much of the edible tissue develops from the receptacle or hypanthium, which is the part of the flower that surrounds the ovary. Look at the flower of the Bartlett pear and fruit to compare the parts. Pomes develop from an inferior ovary, meaning the ovary is positioned below the other floral parts in the flower. Inside the fruit, the actual ovary tissue forms the core, which is divided into chambers called locules that contain the seeds. Surrounding the seeds is the endocarp, which forms the thin papery layer around the core. Outside of that, the core is composed of the mesocarp and exocarp. The exocarp fuses to the edible receptacle. One of the easiest ways to identify a pome is by the star-shaped pattern of the carpels when the fruit is cut crosswise. You can also often see the sepals remaining at the blossom end of the fruit, which provides another clue that the fruit developed from an inferior ovary. As you examine the apple in this activity, pay attention to how the core structure reflects the original structure of the flower. Next, examine the apple, which is an example of a pome. After cutting the apple longitudinally, locate the seeds and locules within the core. The endocarp forms the papery layer around the seeds. Much of the edible portion of the apple actually comes from the receptacle tissue, which means the apple is an accessory fruit. Do you see the faint line surrounding the core? This is the start of the exocarp, and right inside that is the mesocarp. Look at this cross-section of the apple where you can clearly see the star-shaped pattern of the carpels. How many carpels are present in the ovary? Did you count 5? Draw and label the structures in your notebook. Aggregate fruits develop from multiple ovaries within a single flower. Instead of forming one fruit from a single ovary, each ovary develops into its own small fruit, and these small fruits remain clustered together on a shared receptacle. The strawberry is a classic example of an aggregate fruit. In strawberries, the structures that look like seeds on the outside are actually achenes, which are small dry fruits that each contain a seed. The fleshy part that we eat is actually the receptacle, which expands as the fruit develops. Because of this, strawberries are considered accessory fruits, since part of the edible tissue comes from floral structures other than the ovary. Inside the strawberry, the whitish lines that extend from the center to each achene are vascular bundles providing nutrients to the developing achene. Other examples of aggregate fruits include raspberries and blackberries, where each small unit in the cluster represents an individual fruit that developed from a separate ovary in the same flower. When identifying an aggregate fruit, one key clue is that the fruit is made up of many small fruit units that all originated from a single flower. Now examine the strawberry, which is an aggregate fruit. The small structures on the surface that look like seeds are actually achenes, which are tiny dry fruits that each contain a seed. Under the microscope, you can see the styles still attached, which are often the little hairs you may notice when you eat strawberries. The fleshy portion of the strawberry is the receptacle, not the ovary. After slicing the fruit, look for the vascular bundles extending outward toward the achenes, which are the white lines. Draw and label the achenes, vascular bundles, and receptacle tissue. Multiple fruits develop from many flowers within a single inflorescence, rather than from just one flower. As the fruits mature, the ovaries from these individual flowers fuse together along with other floral tissues such as the receptacle to form a single larger fruit structure. A familiar example is the pineapple. Each segment on the outer surface of the pineapple represents a separate flower from the original flower cluster. As the fruit develops, the tissues from these flowers merge together to form the pineapple we recognize. Other examples of multiple fruits include figs and mulberries. One way to identify a multiple fruit is to look for evidence that the fruit originated from many flowers grouping together, often visible as repeating patterns on the fruit surface. This differs from aggregate fruits, which develop from multiple ovaries within a single flower, rather than from multiple flowers. Examine the pineapple, which is a multiple fruit. Each segment on the outer surface represents an individual flower from the original inflorescence. These flowers fuse together with the central receptacle to form the fruit. When you examine the cut section, try to identify the tissue contributed by a single flower. Draw and label the receptacle and one flower segment. Encircle the portion contributed by one flower. Now compare the fruits you examined. First, consider how simple, aggregate, and multiple fruits differ in their origin. Think about whether they develop from one ovary, multiple ovaries on one flower, or ovaries from multiple flowers. Next, compare the pericarp of a drupe and a berry. Both have fleshy tissues, but drupes contain a hard endocarp while berries have a fully fleshy pericarp. Finally, compare strawberries and apples. Both are accessory fruits, but the tissues contributing to their structure differ. To summarize fleshy fruits display remarkable diversity in their structure and origin. These fruits protect developing seeds and often promote dispersal by attracting animals. Different fruit types reflect differences in flower structure, ovary development, and the tissues that contribute to the fruit. Understanding these differences helps explain how plants reproduce and spread across different environments.